The cold metal of Pa's belt buckle sliced through the still evening air, striking the back of Amelia Keller's bare shoulder with such force that the candle in her trembling hands clattered to the floor of the barn. Pages of her secret borrowed book scattered in the dirt like fallen leaves, her only window into a world beyond the brutality of Twin Pines, Texas, 1878. What did I tell you about filling your head with this nonsense? Vernon Keller bellowed, his weathered face contorted in rage as he raised the belt again. No daughter of mine will waste her time on frivolous stories when there's work to be done. Amelia was 21 years old, but felt like a frightened child cowering beneath her father's shadow. The welts forming across her back were familiar companions, punishments for her greatest sin, the desire to learn. Her mother had taught her to read before dying from fever when Amelia was 9, leaving her alone with a father who believed education would ruin a woman. "I'm sorry, Pa," she whispered, tears streaming down her dust-streaked face as she scrambled to gather the pages of Wuthering Heights before they could be further desecrated by her father's boots. "Next time I catch you reading instead of doing your chores, I'll burn every book in this town," Vernon threatened, his voice carrying the scent of whiskey. "Now get back to the house and prepare supper before I give you something to really cry about." As her father's heavy footsteps receded, Amelia pressed the crumpled pages to her chest. The barn door stood open, revealing the vast Texas landscape beyond miles of rugged terrain punctuated by the occasional homestead. Freedom seemed as distant as the horizon itself, a dream as fragile as the pages clutched against her racing heart. The following morning dawned bright and merciless, the summer sun beating down on Twin Pines without remorse. Amelia rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, her movements stiff from yesterday's beating. The kitchen was stifling, but she worked methodically, knowing her father's temper would flare if his eggs weren't cooked precisely to his liking. Vernon Keller sat at the table, his massive frame taking up more space than seemed possible. Years of ranching and hard living had left him with leathery skin and calloused hands. Since her mother's death, he had grown increasingly bitter, finding solace in the bottom of a whiskey bottle rather than in his daughter's company. "I'm heading into town," he announced between mouthfuls. "The Parker Ranch needs extra hands for the week. I expect the house to be spotless when I return." Amelia nodded, relief washing over her at the prospect of several days without her father's watchful eye. "Yes, Pa, I'll take care of everything. And no reading," he added sharply, jabbing a fork in her direction. "I meant what I said." After her father departed, Amelia went about her chores with renewed vigor, completing them in record time. With the house to herself, she retrieved her small collection of hidden books, 3 dog-eared volumes she'd managed to salvage from her mother's belongings before her father had sold or burned the rest. She was so engrossed in the pages that she didn't hear the approach of hoofbeats until they were nearly upon the house. Startled, she shoved the book beneath a cushion and hurried to the door, expecting her father's early return. Instead, she found herself face to face with a stranger, a tall man atop a magnificent chestnut stallion. His clothes were trail-worn but of good quality, and despite the dust of travel that clung to him, there was something undeniably striking about his appearance. "Pardon the intrusion, miss," he said, removing his hat to reveal sun-bleached brown hair. "Name's Jackson James. I've been hired by Mr. Edwards to manage the new cattle operation southwest of town. I was told Vernon Keller might have some advice about the local water situation." Amelia hesitated, her father's warnings about strangers echoing in her mind. But there was something in Jackson's clear blue eyes that put her at ease, an openness that contrasted sharply with her father's perpetual scowl. "My father isn't here," she replied, unconsciously smoothing her apron. "He's working at the Parker Ranch this week." Jackson nodded, disappointment briefly crossing his features before his expression brightened. "And you are Amelia Keller," she answered, surprising herself with her willingness to engage in conversation. "If you'd like to leave a message, I can tell my father when he returns." "That's mighty kind of you, Miss Keller." His gaze wandered past her to the open door, where the edge of her hidden book peeked from beneath the cushion. "Are you a reader?" Amelia froze, instinctively moving to block his view. I'm a great admirer of literature myself," Jackson continued, seemingly oblivious to her discomfort. "Been carrying Whitman's Leaves of Grass in my saddlebag for years now." The mention of poetry sent a thrill through Amelia that she couldn't suppress. "You've read Whitman?" she asked before she could stop herself. Jackson's smile deepened, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "I'd be honored to lend it to you if you're interested." For a moment, Amelia forgot about her father's threats and her own fears. "I would like that very much, Mr. James." "Jackson, please," he insisted, reaching into his saddlebag to produce a worn leather-bound volume. "Consider it a welcome gift to your new neighbor." As Amelia accepted the book, their fingers brushed momentarily, sending an unexpected warmth through her entire body. She quickly pulled away, clutching the poetry collection to her chest. "I should return this to you soon," she said, aware that she was blushing. "Keep it as long as you like," Jackson replied, replacing his hat. "I've got plenty of others. Good day, Miss Keller. I look forward to our next meeting." As he rode away, Amelia watched until he disappeared over the ridge, the book still pressed to her heart like a talisman. That night, by the light of a single candle, she read Whitman's verses again and again until the words were emblazoned in her memory. The week passed quickly, each day bringing new chores and, in the evenings, new poems. Amelia found herself watching the road, hoping for another glimpse of Jackson James, but he didn't return. When her father came home, she hid the book of poetry beneath a loose floorboard in her room, alongside her small collection of treasured volumes. Vernon returned in a fouler mood than usual, complaining about the new cattle operation and the city slicker who was running it. "Man's got no business trying to raise cattle in this country," he grumbled over dinner. "Those fancy Eastern ideas won't survive a Texas summer." Amelia kept her head down, saying little, but her father's words confirmed her suspicion that he was referring to Jackson. The knowledge that her father already disliked him only heightened her interest. 2 days after her father's return, Amelia was sent to town for supplies. Twin Pines was little more than a dusty main street with a general store, saloon, and a handful of other businesses. But to Amelia, these monthly trips represented her only taste of independence. She had just finished loading supplies into their wagon when a familiar voice called her name. Turning, she saw Jackson approaching from the direction of the telegraph office, his smile as warm as the summer sun. "Miss Keller, what a pleasant surprise," he said, tipping his hat. "I've been hoping to cross paths with you again." Amelia glanced nervously around, afraid that someone might report their conversation to her father. "Mr. James, I've been meaning to ask," he continued, lowering his voice. "Did you enjoy Whitman?" The genuine interest in his expression made her momentarily forget her caution. "It was beautiful," she admitted. "I've never read anything like it. I thought you might appreciate it." Jackson's eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "I've got more books at my cabin. You're welcome to borrow any that catch your interest." Amelia's heart raced at the prospect, but reality quickly reasserted itself. "My father doesn't approve of reading. He thinks it's a waste of time, especially for women." Jackson's expression darkened. "That's a terrible shame. Knowledge should never be forbidden." Before Amelia could respond, she noticed Mrs. Peterson from the neighboring farm watching them with undisguised curiosity. "I should go," she said hurriedly. "My father's expecting me back, of course." Jackson stepped back, respecting her urgency. "But if you ever want something new to read, my offer stands." As Amelia drove the wagon home, her mind was filled with conflicting emotions. The attraction she felt toward Jackson was undeniable, but the risk of defying her father seemed insurmountable. Still, the promise of more books, more windows into worlds beyond Twin Pines was a temptation she found difficult to resist. When she arrived home, Vernon was waiting in the yard, his face like thunder. "You took your sweet time in town," he accused, grabbing her arm roughly as she climbed down from the wagon. "The store was busy," Amelia explained, trying to pull away from his painful grip. "Busy flirting with that new rancher, from what I hear," Vernon spat, his fingers digging deeper into her flesh. "Mrs. Peterson saw you talking to him like some common saloon girl." Amelia's blood ran cold. "We only exchanged pleasantries, Pa. Don't lie to me." Vernon's open palm struck her cheek with enough force to send her staggering. "No decent man wants a wife who can't keep her eyes lowered and her mouth shut. Is that why your mother taught you to read? So you could shame me?" Tears sprang to Amelia's eyes, not from the pain of the blow but from the mention of her mother. "Please, Pa, it wasn't like that. Get inside and unpack those supplies," Vernon ordered, releasing her arm. "And if I ever hear about you speaking to that man again, you'll wish you'd never learned to string two words together." That night, after her father had fallen into a drunken sleep, Amelia crept to her hiding place and retrieved Whitman's poems. She knew she should return the book, cut all ties with Jackson James, but something inside her rebelled at the thought. Instead, she read by moonlight, finding solace in verses that spoke of freedom and the vastness of human experience. 3 days later, Vernon announced that he would be traveling to San Antonio for a livestock auction, leaving Amelia alone for nearly a week. She saw both opportunity and danger in his absence, a chance to see Jackson again, but also the risk of discovery if anyone in town noticed, and reported back to her father. 2 days into her father's absence, Amelia was hanging laundry when she spotted a rider approaching from the direction of Jackson's ranch. Her heart leapt as she recognized the chestnut stallion, and she found herself smoothing her hair and straightening her simple calico dress before he arrived. Jackson dismounted with easy grace, leading his horse to the water trough before approaching her. "Good afternoon, Miss Keller. I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Amelia replied, forgetting her earlier resolve to maintain distance. "My father's away on business." Something in Jackson's expression suggested this wasn't news to him. "In that case, I was wondering if you might join me for a picnic tomorrow. There's a lovely spot by the creek on my property. Completely proper, of course, just a chance to enjoy some conversation without looking over our shoulders." The invitation was so unexpected that Amelia didn't immediately respond. A private meeting with a man her father despised was beyond reckless, yet the prospect filled her with exhilaration rather than dread. "I shouldn't," she began, but Jackson interrupted gently. "Bring the Whitman with you if you'd like to return it, and I'll have a selection of other books for your consideration." His eyes held hers, earnest and hopeful. "Just a few hours of civilized conversation, Amelia. Is that so terrible?" The use of her first name sent a pleasant shiver through her. "What time?" she heard herself asking. "I'll come by at noon," Jackson replied, his smile brightening. "Wear something comfortable for riding. I'll bring a spare mount." After he left, Amelia spent hours alternating between anticipation and panic. What she was planning was foolish at best, dangerous at worst. If her father ever found out, she forced the thought from her mind, focusing instead on the promise of books, conversation, and Jackson's company. The following day dawned clear and warm. Amelia, dressed in her best riding skirt and a blue blouse that her mother had sewn years ago, saving it for special occasions that never seemed to come. She packed Whitman's poems in a small bag and waited nervously on the porch, half expecting her father to appear suddenly and catch her in the act of rebellion. Jackson arrived precisely at noon, leading a gentle-looking Palomino mare alongside his stallion. He wore clean clothing and had trimmed his beard, giving him an even more handsome appearance than Amelia remembered. "You look lovely," he said as he helped her mount the mare, his hands strong but gentle at her waist. The ride to Jackson's property took nearly an hour, but Amelia barely noticed the time passing. Jackson pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his travels across the country, from the crowded streets of New York to the majestic mountains of Colorado. By the time they reached the creek, a surprisingly lush oasis amid the Texas landscape, Amelia felt as though she had traveled those miles herself. Jackson had prepared a simple but elegant picnic: cold chicken, fresh bread, cheese, and even a bottle of wine. As they ate in the shade of a cottonwood tree, Amelia found herself relaxing, sharing stories of her childhood and her mother's love of literature. "She taught me to read when I was 4, Amelia explained, watching the play of sunlight through the leaves overhead. "She said books were magic, that they could take you anywhere, even if your body had to stay put." Jackson nodded, his expression thoughtful. "She sounds like a remarkable woman. You must miss her terribly." "Every day," Amelia admitted. "After she died, Pa changed. He'd never been an easy man, but he became harder. He burned most of her books, said they'd poisoned her mind with fancy ideas that had no place in Texas." "And yet you kept reading," Jackson observed, his admiration evident. Amelia smiled ruefully. "I couldn't stop. It was like asking me to stop breathing." She hesitated, then added quietly, "He beats me when he catches me with books, says he's saving me from myself." Jackson's expression darkened, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "No man has the right to treat another human being that way, especially not his own daughter." "It's just the way things are," Amelia said, though even to her own ears, the justification sounded hollow. "It doesn't have to be." Jackson reached for his saddlebag and withdrew a stack of books, placing them carefully on the blanket between them. "I brought these for you: Pride and Prejudice, Jane Eyre, some Dickens, and a volume of Shakespeare's sonnets." Amelia stared at the books in astonishment. "I can't possibly hide all these from my father." "You won't have to," Jackson said, his voice gentle but firm. "I have a proposal for you, Amelia, one that might sound outlandish at first, but I ask that you hear me out." Intrigued, Amelia nodded for him to continue. "I'm building a small cabin on the far edge of my property," Jackson explained. "Originally intended as a guest house, but I've been thinking it could serve as a private library, a place where you could read in peace without fear of punishment." Amelia's breath caught in her throat. "A library?" "For me?" "Yes." Jackson's gaze was intense, his sincerity unmistakable. "You could visit whenever your father is away. No one would have to know." The offer was so unexpected, so perfectly aligned with her deepest desires, that Amelia found herself momentarily speechless. A place of her own, filled with books. It seemed too wonderful to be real. "Why would you do this for me?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jackson reached across the blanket to take her hand, his touch sending warmth coursing through her veins. "Because no one should be punished for seeking knowledge. Because I've never met anyone who appreciates literature the way you do. And because He paused, his expression vulnerable. I find myself thinking about you far more often than is proper for such a brief acquaintance. Amelia's heart hammered in her chest, both frightened and exhilarated by his admission. This is madness, she said, but she didn't withdraw her hand from his. Perhaps, Jackson conceded with a small smile, but sometimes madness is preferable to a sensible cage. As they rode back to her father's ranch that afternoon, Amelia carried the books Jackson had given her carefully concealed in a flour sack. They had agreed that she would visit the library cabin once it was complete, using her father's frequent absences as opportunities to slip away. The next 3 weeks passed in a haze of anticipation and fear. Vernon remained largely oblivious to his daughter's preoccupation, too consumed with his own concerns about the worsening drought and dwindling cattle prices. Twice, he left overnight for business in neighboring towns, and each time, Amelia rode to Jackson's ranch to check on the progress of the cabin. Jackson worked tirelessly, often by lantern light long after his ranch hands had retired for the evening. The small structure took shape rapidly, a single room with large windows to capture the natural light, shelves lining the walls, and a comfortable reading chair positioned to catch the afternoon sun. "It'll be finished before the first fall frost," Jackson promised as they stood in the doorway, surveying his handiwork. "I've sent for more books from San Antonio. They should arrive by month's end." Amelia marveled at his dedication, at the care he took to create this sanctuary for her. During these brief visits, they talked for hours about books, ideas, dreams, and the world beyond Twin Pines. With each conversation, the connection between them deepened, evolving from friendship into something more profound. By the time autumn arrived, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber, the library was complete. Jackson had assembled an impressive collection of volumes, classics, poetry, history, and even scientific texts arranged carefully on the polished pine shelves. A small stove in the corner provided warmth, and colorful curtains framed the windows. On the day of its completion, Jackson presented Amelia with a key, his expression solemn. "This place is yours," he told her. "Come whenever you can, stay as long as you wish. I'll keep watch for your father's return if you're worried about time." Tears welled in Amelia's eyes as she accepted the key, overwhelmed by his generosity. "I don't know how to thank you. Your happiness is thanks enough," Jackson replied, his own voice thick with emotion. That night, when Vernon announced his intention to attend a 3-day cattle auction in a neighboring county, Amelia could barely contain her excitement. The moment his wagon disappeared from view the next morning, she saddled her horse, a liberty she rarely took, and rode directly to the library cabin. Jackson was waiting for her, a book in his hands. "I thought we might begin with this," he said, holding up a copy of the Odyssey. "Have you read Homer before?" Amelia shook her head, settling into the comfortable chair as Jackson pulled up a wooden stool beside her. "Would you read it aloud?" she asked shyly. "I've always loved being read to." Jackson's smile was warm as he opened the book to the first page. "Sing to me of the man, Muse, the man of twists and turns, driven time and again off course." As his rich voice filled the small cabin, Amelia closed her eyes, allowing the ancient words to transport her. This became their ritual over the following months, Jackson reading aloud while Amelia listened, sometimes asking questions or offering observations that led to spirited discussions. They were careful, always vigilant about Vernon's whereabouts, but their caution couldn't prevent the inevitable whispers in town. Twin Pines was too small for secrets, especially ones involving an unmarried woman and a handsome newcomer. The rumors reached Vernon in early December. carried by the loose tongue of a saloon regular who'd seen Amelia's horse tethered near Jackson's property. Vernon returned from a trading expedition a day early, his rage building with each mile as he rehearsed his confrontation. Amelia was in the library, alone with a copy of Great Expectations, when she heard the thunder of approaching hooves. Looking out the window, her blood turned to ice as she recognized her father's bay gelding galloping toward the cabin. Vernon's massive frame hunched forward in the saddle like a storm cloud. She had barely enough time to hide the book and compose herself before the door burst open, revealing Vernon's contorted face. "So it's true," he snarled, crossing the threshold with menacing slowness. "My own daughter sneaking around like a common harlot." "Pa, it's not what you think," Amelia began, backing away as he advanced. "This is just a place to read. Vernon's laugh was cruel as his gaze swept over the shelves of books. "You've been disobeying me, filling your head with nonsense, and worse, letting that fancy rancher turn your head with his city ways. Jackson built this place for me because he understands what books mean to me," Amelia explained, her voice stronger than she expected. "He's been kind when you've been cruel. He sees value in me beyond cooking and cleaning." The blow came swiftly, knocking Amelia against the bookshelf with enough force to send several volumes tumbling to the floor. Pain exploded across her cheek, but it was the hatred in her father's eyes that truly wounded her. "You ungrateful little—" Vernon raised his hand for another strike, but the sound of a rifle being cocked froze him mid-motion. "Step away from her, Keller." Jackson stood in the doorway, his rifle trained steadily on Vernon's chest. "Now." Vernon's face flushed dark with fury, but he lowered his hand. "This isn't your concern, James. She's my daughter." "Being your daughter doesn't make her your property," Jackson replied, his voice cold as January frost. "And any man who raises a hand to a woman in my presence makes it very much my concern." Amelia used the distraction to move away from her father, her fingers touching the tender spot where his blow had landed. "Pa, please just go home. We can talk about this later when you're calmer." "I'm done talking," Vernon spat. "Pack your things. We're leaving Twin Pines by week's end." Jackson's expression remained impassive, but his knuckles whitened around the rifle. "That would be Amelia's decision to make, not yours. She's a grown woman." Vernon's laugh was ugly. "You think you know her after a few months of reading poetry? I raised her." "I know what's best. You beat her for wanting to learn," Jackson interrupted, his control slipping momentarily. "You've terrorized her, isolated her, and tried to break her spirit. That's not protection, it's tyranny." For a moment, silence filled the cabin, broken only by the sound of Amelia's ragged breathing. Then Vernon spoke, his voice dangerously quiet. "She leaves with me, or she leaves as no daughter of mine. Your choice, girl." The ultimatum hung in the air between them. Amelia looked from her father, the only family she had left, to Jackson, whose steady gaze offered something she'd never truly known: freedom. "I'm staying," she said finally, her voice small but resolute, Vernon's face contorted with rage and something that might have been pain. "Then you're dead to me." He turned to Jackson, jabbing a finger in his direction. "And you'll regret taking what's mine." With those parting words, Vernon stormed from the cabin, mounted his horse, and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust in his wake. As the sound of hoofbeats faded, Amelia's composure crumbled. She sank to the floor, trembling violently, tears streaming down her face. Jackson set aside his rifle and knelt beside her, gently gathering her into his arms. "I'm so sorry," he whispered against her hair. "I never meant to come between you and your family." "You didn't," Amelia replied through her tears. "He did that himself long ago." She looked up at Jackson, her expression both frightened and determined. What do I do now? Where will I go? Jackson's gaze was tender as he brushed a tear from her cheek. You could stay with Mrs. Henderson in town. She's been looking for a companion since her husband passed. Or, Amelia prompted when he hesitated. Or you could marry me, Jackson said simply. Not out of necessity or gratitude, but because I love you, Amelia. I think I've loved you since that first day when I saw you trying to hide a book from a stranger. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. You love me, more than I thought possible, Jackson confessed. But I don't want you to answer now. Take time to think, to be sure. Whatever you decide, the library remains yours, and my feelings won't change. Amelia considered his words, her mind racing through possibilities. The prospect of marriage to Jackson filled her with joy rather than the dread she'd always associated with the institution. With him, she could have both love and learning, passion and poetry. I don't need time, she said, her voice steadying. I love you too, Jackson. I have for months now. His smile was radiant as he leaned forward to place a gentle, questioning kiss on her lips. Amelia responded with unexpected fervor, her arms twining around his neck as years of suppressed emotion found release. When they finally parted, both breathless, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. I promise you, Amelia, our life together will be filled with books and respect and adventure, and I will read to you every night if that's what you desire. It is, she whispered, feeling truly happy for the first time in years. It is exactly what I desire. They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the Twin Pines Church. Vernon did not attend, having made good on his threat to leave the area, selling his ranch to a family from Dallas and departing without a word to his daughter. Though his absence left a hollow place in Amelia's heart, it was quickly filled with the joy of her new life. Jackson proved to be a man of his word. Each evening after supper, they would retire to the library cabin, now expanded and connected to the main house by a covered walkway, and he would read aloud from their growing collection, while Amelia worked on her embroidery or simply listened, content. As winter gave way to spring, Amelia discovered she was expecting their first child. The news brought Jackson such evident joy that she found herself falling in love with him all over again. What shall we name him? Jackson asked one evening, his hand resting protectively over her slightly rounded abdomen. Him. So certain it's a boy, Amelia teased. Jackson grinned. A father can hope, but girl or boy, I was thinking we might name the child after an author we both admire. Amelia considered this, her fingers absently stroking the spine of a nearby book. Austin for a girl, perhaps, or Charlotte. Perfect, Jackson agreed. And for a boy, William. After Shakespeare, William James. Amelia tested the name aloud. It has a distinguished sound. As her pregnancy progressed, Amelia found herself unable to make the walk to the library cabin as frequently. Recognizing her disappointment, Jackson undertook a new project, moving their most beloved volumes to shelves he installed in their bedroom. Now I can read to both of you without you having to brave the evening chill, he explained, arranging the books with careful attention to Amelia's preferences. By the time autumn returned to Twin Pines, bringing crisp air and golden sunlight, Amelia was heavy with child. The baby, active and strong, seemed to respond to Jackson's voice when he read each night, kicking enthusiastically during particularly dramatic passages. I think we have a literary critic in the making, Amelia remarked one evening, placing Jackson's hand where their child was performing what felt like somersaults. With such learned parents, how could it be otherwise? Jackson replied, his expression tender as he felt the movement beneath his palm. William Thomas James was born on a stormy November night, arriving with a robust cry that immediately endeared him to both parents. He had Jackson's blue eyes and a tuft of dark hair that Amelia was certain came from her side of the family. As she cradled her son in the early morning light, Amelia felt a completeness she had never known before. Jackson sat beside them on the bed, his arm around her shoulders, gazing at their child with undisguised wonder. "He's perfect," Jackson whispered, gently touching William's tiny hand, "just like his mother." Amelia leaned against her husband's solid strength, thinking of the journey that had brought her to this moment of pure happiness. "Will you read to him too?" she asked. "Even before he understands the words." "Every night," Jackson promised, pressing a kiss to her temple. "We'll start with the simplest tales and work our way up to the classics." True to his word, Jackson began reading to William that very evening simple nursery rhymes at first, then short children's stories as the boy grew. By his first birthday, William would sit transfixed in his mother's lap, while his father's voice filled their home with adventures and fantasies. As the years passed, the library continued to grow, with Jackson adding a new wing to accommodate their expanding collection. Travelers passing through Twin Pines often brought books as gifts, having heard of the unusual ranch house with more books than cattle. When William was 3, Amelia gave birth to twin girls, Austin and Charlotte, who inherited their mother's love of stories and their father's curiosity about the world. The 5 of them would gather in the library each evening, a family ritual that never lost its charm. On the twins' 5th birthday, an unexpected letter arrived from San Antonio. Amelia recognized her father's handwriting immediately, though the script was shakier than she remembered. With trembling fingers, she broke the seal and read the brief message. "Daughter, I am unwell and unlikely to see another winter. If you wish to speak before I go, I am staying at Mrs. Kavanaugh's boarding house on Front Street." Your father. Amelia showed the letter to Jackson, her emotions too tangled to express. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "After all this time, all these years of silence." Jackson took her hands in his. "What does your heart tell you?" Amelia considered the question carefully. The hurt her father had inflicted was real and deep, but so was the connection between them, however flawed. "I think I need to see him," she finally said. "Not for his sake, but for mine, to find peace." The journey to San Antonio took 2 days, with Jackson driving the wagon while Amelia attempted to prepare herself for the reunion. They left the children with their trusted housekeeper, promising to return within the week. Mrs. Kavanaugh's boarding house was a respectable establishment near the center of town. When they inquired at the front desk, the proprietress led them to a small room on the 2nd floor, her expression sympathetic. "He doesn't have many visitors," she explained in a hushed voice. "And the doctor doesn't give him much time." Vernon Keller was a shadow of the imposing man Amelia remembered. Propped up in bed, his once powerful frame had withered, his skin hanging loosely on prominent bones. When he saw Amelia in the doorway, something flickered in his roomy eyes, recognition, perhaps even remorse. "You came," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "Yes, Pa." Amelia moved to his bedside, Jackson a supportive presence behind her. "How are you feeling?" Vernon gave a dismissive wave. "Dying, according to the sawbones. Can't say I'm surprised." His gaze shifted to Jackson, hardening slightly. "You're still with him, then?" "I am," Amelia confirmed. "We have 3 beautiful children, a boy and twin girls." Something that might have been regret crossed Vernon's features. "Grandchildren I'll never know." "That was your choice," Amelia reminded him gently. Vernon nodded, conceding the point. "I was wrong about many things," he admitted after a long silence. "Your mother, she tried to tell me, said reading gave you wings, not chains. I didn't understand." Tears pricked Amelia's eyes at the mention of her mother. She was right. I know that now. Vernon's gaze returned to Jackson. You built her that library. It wasn't a question, but Jackson answered anyway. Yes, sir, and I've read to her every night since. Vernon considered this, his expression unreadable. Then, with visible effort, he reached toward the small table beside his bed, withdrawing a worn, leather-bound volume from the drawer. This was your mother's, he said, extending the book to Amelia. I couldn't bring myself to burn it, though I told you I had. Kept it all these years, not really knowing why. Amelia accepted the book with reverent hands, recognizing her mother's favorite collection of sonnets. Thank you, she whispered, clutching it to her chest. I was a hard man, Vernon continued, his breathing labored. Too hard. Set in my ways and afraid of change. It cost me my daughter and any chance to know her children. He paused, gathering strength. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just wanted to see you once more and tell you. Your mother would be proud of the woman you've become. Those words, so unexpected and so longed for, broke the last barrier around Amelia's heart. Tears flowed freely as she reached for her father's withered hand. I forgive you anyway, Pa. They stayed with Vernon through the night, Amelia reading from her mother's book while Jackson kept vigil from a chair in the corner. Near dawn, Vernon's breathing changed, becoming shallow and irregular. Amelia set aside the book and took his hand again. Would you like me to read something else? She asked softly. Vernon's eyes, clearer than they had been all night, found hers. You read just like her, he murmured. Always did. Those were his last words. Vernon Keller passed quietly as the first light of dawn filtered through the window, his daughter's hand in his, and the words of poets filling the room. They buried him in the small cemetery outside San Antonio, beneath a simple marker that bore his name and the dates of his life. As they stood beside the fresh grave, Jackson's arm around her shoulders, Amelia felt a complex mixture of grief and relief. Are you all right? Jackson asked as they walked back to their wagon. Amelia nodded, her mother's book of sonnets tucked safely in her pocket. I think I am. There's sadness, of course, but also closure. He acknowledged my mother's wisdom in the end. That means something. The journey home seemed shorter somehow, the Texas landscape beautiful in the golden autumn light. When they arrived at their ranch, the children rushed out to greet them, their faces bright with excitement. Papa read to us every night, William announced proudly, but he does the voices wrong. Jackson laughed, swinging his son into his arms. Is that so? Perhaps you'd better demonstrate the proper technique. Later that evening, with the children bathed and tucked into bed, Amelia and Jackson retreated to their library. The familiar scent of leather bindings and paper embraced them as they settled into their favorite chairs beside the crackling fire. What shall it be tonight? Jackson asked, gesturing to the surrounding shelves. Amelia smiled, withdrawing her mother's book of sonnets from her pocket. I thought perhaps we might begin this one anew, she suggested. In memory of both my parents. Jackson nodded, accepting the volume with careful hands. As he began to read, his voice rich and resonant in the quiet room, Amelia closed her eyes and allowed herself to be carried away by the beauty of the words. This was her life now, surrounded by books and love, the two things her mother had valued most. In the years that followed, the library continued to grow, eventually becoming famous throughout Texas. Travelers would detour to Twin Pines specifically to visit the Reading Ranch, as it came to be known. Jackson and Amelia established a small school on their property, where local children could learn to read regardless of their family's means. William grew into a thoughtful young man with his father's love of the land and his mother's passion for literature. The twins, inseparable and spirited, developed their own specialties. Austin drawn to mathematics and science, Charlotte to history and languages. Each night, no matter how busy their days had been, the family gathered in the library to read together. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Jackson surprised Amelia with a special addition to their home, a tower room with windows on all sides, offering views of the surrounding countryside. Inside, he placed a single comfortable chair, a small table, and a lamp. "Your very own reading nook," he explained as he led her up the spiral staircase for the first time. "A place just for you, though I hope you'll invite me occasionally." Amelia turned in a slow circle, taking in the peaceful space with its perfect light and comfortable solitude. "It's wonderful," she said, eyes shining with emotion. "But you know, after all these years, my favorite place to read is still wherever you are, with your voice bringing the words to life." Jackson smiled, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening with the expression. Though his hair was now streaked with silver and his face weathered by Texas sun and wind, he was still the same man who had built her a library and changed her life. "Then I shall continue reading to you," he promised, taking her hand. "Every night, for as long as we both shall live." Amelia stood on tiptoe to kiss him, gratitude and love filling her heart. From that frightened young woman hiding books from her father, she had blossomed into a respected community leader, mother, and teacher, all because one man had understood that knowledge should be a gift, not a forbidden fruit. As they descended the stairs to rejoin their family, Amelia thought about the journey that had brought her here, the pain and the joy, the losses and the gains. Her father's cruelty had inadvertently led her to Jackson, and his love of books had created this extraordinary life they now shared. That evening, as always, the family gathered in the library. William, now studying law in Austin but home for the anniversary celebration, selected a volume of Mark Twain. The twins, 16 and brimming with opinions, settled on the floor with their needlework. Jackson took his customary chair, and Amelia sat beside him, their hands naturally finding each other as he began to read. Outside, the Texas sun set in a blaze of color, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Inside, surrounded by books and family, Amelia knew with absolute certainty that she had found her perfect happiness not in escape from her past, but in the life she and Jackson had built together, one page at a time. As night fell fully, Jackson's voice continued to fill the room, weaving stories that transported them all beyond the boundaries of Twin Pines. Amelia closed her eyes, just as she had that first day in the library cabin, and gave herself over to the magic of words and the love of the man who had taught her that knowledge, like love itself, only grows when shared.